You're listening to another edition of MCX Sports Podcast, 88.9 FM, Monmouth University.
Hey, Hawk fans, Joel Lacalandra here. I'm joined by the current sports director of WMCX, Mike Zimmermann, for the first ever WMCX Sports blog podcast. And our topic today will be the Monmouth men's basketball team. We'll talk about their offseason. One, Mike, that I think has been a pretty strong one on paper so far. There's been a lot of turnover.
Yeah, certainly, Joe. There's been a lot of change, like you mentioned. We're expecting a couple good players coming in, whether it's transfer or freshmen coming in at the beginning of next season. So I'm excited to see how this offseason goes. I know we've seen some action the past couple of months or so, but there's still certainly more to come.
Before we talk about the new guys that are coming in, we'll talk about the ones that are leaving. 4 Monmouth players from last year's roster are leaving the school, highlighted by Tyrone O'Garo. He was really the only one out of the 4 who was in the rotation last year. Tyrone, along with Christian White, Jalen Palm, and Marcelo Hudiger will be going elsewhere next year. We're not sure where each guy is going. I do know from just personally that Christian White is going to Syracuse, but we don't think he's going to be playing basketball there. But what about the loss of O'Garo? How do you think that's going to affect the team next year?
Well, it's certainly going to affect the rebounding margin for the Hawks. He was the best rebounder on the team, a very athletic 6'5" forward. Loved to bang down low with the big guys. He's a very athletic guy who can get up there and dunk. We know we've seen a couple of SportsCenter top 10 dunks from him, so obviously they're going to miss his athleticism and I think more importantly his defensive ability. Not only can he jump and rebound, but he's a long defender as well, so he can play along the perimeter if they feel like playing a zone, or he can even play down low as well. So I think a very versatile player like Tyrone O'Garo is certainly going to be a big miss.
Yeah, you talk about how versatile he is on the defensive end. He's only about 6'5". He's built like a guard, yet he's able to guard the 3, the 4, the 5 positions. You talked about the alley-oops on offense, but I think the main thing with O'Garo was more so than anything on the offensive end, he was almost a liability, especially at the free throw line.
Yeah, definitely. But I think the Hawks as a team definitely struggled from the line. They're going to have to improve that next season if they want to win a MAC championship. So I think it wasn't just O'Garo from the line. I think it was the entire team, and I know Coach Kingrice and the coaching staff will definitely address that and work on that, because in order to win games, you had to hit free throws.
Last year, Monmouth finished 11-21 on the season. They lost in the first round of the MAC tournament to Ryder. Much higher expectations coming in this season as well. We'll talk about some of the new guys coming in. First, I want to talk about the transfer that's coming in. Bryce Cofane, a transfer from Providence, 6'8", redshirt senior, so he'll be eligible to play right away. I know the transfer rules are always funky. We never know how it goes with each guy, but this is kind of similar to Monmouth losing a guy last year who wound up in Niagara. I'm blanking on his name right now. Marcus, right? That played here. Marcus Ware was a fifth-year guy who graduated from Monmouth and played at Niagara last year. This is a very similar situation with Cofane, who's a graduate of Providence this year, and he'll be eligible to play right away. And he's a guy that I think could fit right in and possibly start at power forward, although it's very early to tell.
Well, I think not only can he compete, but he'll bring that big-time college basketball experience, especially playing at Providence. He's used to playing those big-time Big East teams, playing in the Garden. You know, I think that's even Providence had a good run in the tournament, eventually falling to North Carolina. But I think that he'll bring a certain experience that this Hawks team needs, especially because they're so young. We talked about throughout this entire season, they had 8 freshmen on this roster, and I think he'll bring in some leadership and experience to go alongside with Deion Jones and Andrew Nicholas.
Yeah, I was reading something online the other day that they talked about before the season. Monmouth, as terms of experience, was, I think, 342nd out of the 345 teams in college basketball. So by all accounts, they exceeded expectations last year, even though it was disappointing at the end.
Oh, certainly. And when you look at this roster on paper and you see all those freshmen, and you look at Bayshawn Mickens, who didn't even play this season because of an injury, you're going to bring him back next season, a very good sharp shooter, and you bring back the likes of Josh James, Justin Robinson, Zach Tillman, Chris Brady. so many of these freshmen contributed throughout this season, and then with a year under their belt, I think they're just going to raise their game even more. And even next year, they're still going to be young as sophomores. And let's not forget also Deion Jones. This was his first year at Monmouth. He had to sit out a year after transferring from Towson, so it was sort of like shaking the rust off a little, and he was still one of the Hawks' best players. So I think things are looking up for the Hawks next season because they're gaining all this experience from this past season.
Mike, you mentioned the backcourt. King Rice made an effort this offseason so far to improve the backcourt, especially at the point guard position. He brings in Austin Tilghman, who was a 2-star prospect according to ESPN.com from Middletown, Delaware, kind of from the same area as Deion Jones. Actually, I don't know if they have any kind of connection as well, but he comes in. He's a 6'1" guard. He's expected to compete for time in the backcourt. And the other guy is Micah Seaborn, who's a 6'5", 190-pound guard from Arlington, Texas. He's a guy that we've already read about that Monmouth expects to contribute right away next year.
Yeah, certainly, and it makes you wonder what they're going to do with Justin Robinson and Josh James if they're bringing in all these guards in the backcourt, whether they want to keep Robinson at the point guard, keep Josh James as sort of a combo guard, or permanently put James as the point guard. So it's going to be interesting to see what King Rice does with these guys coming in and with the guys already here, how he's going to rotate them, where he's going to put them. So it's going to be interesting, something to look out for.
Seaborn is rated as a 3-star prospect from ESPN.com and with a grade of 70, which would be one of the better recruits I think King Rice has had here in the past couple of years. He figures to be a big part of this team going forward in the future. I read a quote with him from the Asbury Park press writer Josh Newman. He said that King Rice and Derek Phelps told him that they expect him to be a big part of this team next year and to bring really a leadership, which is kind of interesting that he said that coming in as a freshman. He says that he brings a winning mentality. He only lost 5 games his entire career in college and in high school, and we all know it's been such a difficult last 5-6 years for this Monmouth program. They could certainly use that winning mentality.
Well, I think that we're seeing a lot of these, maybe 6'5" guards coming in now because in the first year of the MAC, Monmouth was built like an NEC team, a traditional 2-guard, 2-forward, and a center type team. Now in the MAC, they sort of need to adjust. They need to become more athletic. They need to be able to shoot better from the perimeter, and I think that's why they're bringing in more backcourt guys, more, about 6'5" players who can play a guard position, can play a forward position, but in the MAC, you need to adjust. It's all about fast-paced, up-tempo, and shooting the ball with athletic guards. And I think that's exactly what Coach King Rice is bringing in.
Yeah, and you talk about athletic guys that can get up and down the floor. Josh James is the first name that comes to mind with me. He really came on strong at the end of the year. He got to play a little more with Justin Robinson having the foot injury, and he really took hold of that starting point guard position. I look to him, along with Deion Jones, to be the 2 best players in this Monmouth team next year.
Absolutely, but you can't forget about Andrew Nicholas. Andrew Nicholas will be a senior, has been a starter for almost the entire 3 years he's been here, upcoming 4 years, but he's the best shooter on this team. We know he can get hot at any time, but he needs to become more consistent. We'll see him put up 30 points a game one night, and then he'll go 1 of 7 from the field the next night. He just needs to become a little more consistent. We know he has the firepower. We know he has the stroke. We know he can score the basketball. Just needs to become a little more consistent.
Yeah, I think I talked about it a bunch of times on our broadcast last year that Andrew Nicholas was really the X factor for this Monmouth Hawks team. You talked about it. He had a couple games. I'm recalling the Fordham game in particular here at Monmouth University where he just went off and he overshadowed a great performance by the Fordham guard John Xavier, who had 32 in that game. And Nicholas, I think, went up with 33 of his own and really carried Monmouth down the stretch. Other games this year, I mean, can't forget the Canisius game, what he did down the stretch there. He just seems to be a clutch guy, but like you said, he's inconsistent to the fact that where you don't know what you're going to get from game to game, and he's just another guy moving forward that will be very key, and he'll be really, I know Deion will be a senior as well next year. Him and Max will be the 2 graduating seniors because Deion still has another year of eligibility, so it'll be a big year moving forward for Nicholas.
And I think the one issue Monmouth has, which I wouldn't even call it an issue, it's a good problem to have. They're going to have so much depth next year. Who's going to get a starting spot? Who's going to have to come off the bench? It's going to be something to look for the first couple weeks of next season to see how players are rotated in and out. You mentioned Max DeLeo. He was virtually the
You don't want to forget about him.
I mean, he got hurt at St. Peter's. I remember me and Mike Heyer were doing the game, got injured right at the buzzer at halftime after attempting a 3-point shot, but he came down, injured his ankle, was never really the same after that. But he was the sixth man for the Hawks last year. He came in, gave them a spark, whether it was, his defense. He's a very good man-to-man defender, and he's also a very good three-point shooter. Where is he going to factor in next season? You're bringing in a couple guys who have high expectations next year. You also have Deion Jones, Andrew Nicholas, Justin Robinson will be healthy next year.
You mentioned Bayshawn Mickens as well, who didn't even play at all last year. He's a walk-on, so we don't really know what to expect from him at all. But from what I heard, he's a pretty good outside shooter as well.
He is a very good outside shooter. So I think I wouldn't even call it an issue or a problem. They're going to have trouble rotating these guys, which is a good thing because there's so many talented players.
The one other guy I haven't mentioned so far who's part of this recruiting class for Monmouth so far is Nikola Vujovic. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his name right. He went to Notre Dame Prep up in Massachusetts. Obviously, he's a European guy, an unproven guy. Monmouth's had a couple of those guys going back, 3, 4, 5 years ago. It's been a couple of years since we've had a European guy on the team. Although, actually, I'm misspeaking because Vuk is European as well. But he's another guy who's really an unknown quantity. He'll be, probably competing for a front court position along with Chris Brady, along with Zach Tillman, and we mentioned
Greg Nowak as well.
Greg Nowak as well is another guy that you saw spurts last season where he was very good as well. So all around, I mean, it's still a very young team moving forward, but I think the big thing for King Rice moving forward when they start practices this summer is who's going to separate themselves and who's going to really, make a play for the rotation as well.
And that's what it's going to come down to. It's not necessarily going to come down to the regular season. It's going to come down to the summer. It's going to come down to the fall workouts. Who's going to step up and who's going to earn that playing time? Who's going to earn that starting spot? Because that's where it's going to start. You're going to earn that spot in the offseason. And then once the season comes, you get that spot, then you have to keep it. It's all about the time, not during the season. The offseason is the most important part because you can show the coaches, I've been improving ever since last season, and I want this starting spot.
And one name before we wrap up this first ever podcast, I want to mention, he was here this past weekend, Jalon Hornbeek, transferring from Oklahoma. It was talked about that Monmouth was the first team to reach out to him, and there is a connection there. Apparently, he is very good friends with Micah Seaborn, the new recruit we talked about before from Monmouth. So there is a connection, and he was here this past weekend at Monmouth, and from all reports on Twitter, his visit went very well. Now, Mike, me and you were talking about this just before we went on the air here. Where does he fit in if he's possibly going to come here, and how does Monmouth get him in?
Well, the problem with that is he'll have to sit out 1 year if he does, in fact, come to Monmouth because of the transfer rules in the NCAA. You can't transfer from one Division I school to the other without sitting out 1 year. We saw that with Deion Jones 2 years ago. But I think it's going to be interesting because right now, as of now, there aren't any available scholarships left on this team. So whether he's going to come in, sit out 1 year as a walk-on, and then when Andrew Nicholas and Max DeLeo graduate, they'll have some room on this team and possibly give him a scholarship after next season. So that's something to look for if, in fact, he does come here.
And he does have a couple other visits lined up that I saw on Twitter. He's going to visit Houston and Colorado State, so it's no slam dunk that he does come here, but there's certainly a connection there between him, King Rice, and Seaborn as well. Hornbeek played 2 years at Oklahoma, averaged 5.6 points per game his freshman year and 5.1 points per game last year. He was regarded as one of the top recruits of the shooting guards coming out of high school a few years ago. So that would certainly be, if that ever happened down the line, that'd be one of the best transfers I think Monmouth's ever had here.
Absolutely. And we mentioned getting transfers from big-time programs like Providence, now from Oklahoma possibly. It's important to get these guys not only from big-time programs, but from big-time programs that compete against top teams. You look at Oklahoma, they play the likes of Kansas, Kansas State, Texas. these are top programs year in and year out. So I think you'll definitely see some battle-tested guys come in from big-time programs such as Oklahoma and Providence.
Well, thank you, Mike, for joining us today. We hope that this will be a weekly thing on the WMCX Sports blog. You can visit us online at wmcxsports.wordpress.com. Also, follow WMCX Sports on Twitter at WMCX Sports for all of your Monmouth Hawks information moving forward into next year. So for Mike Zimmermann, I'm Joe Lacalandra. Thank you for tuning in.